Welcome to Unhiding, Whiteboarding Edition, presented by Squirrel North. Tune in to learn about leadership, modern management, and using the Kanban method. Every episode is designed to provide you with pragmatic, proven, and actionable guidance. We need a user story for that. That's one of the most common catchphrases Agile teams use to mean we have some work to do. And if you look at most backlogs, you will find that user stories have become the ubiquitous, universal artifact to represent work. However, when everything becomes a story, that creates all the conditions for all the complexities that we have in our work to hide. So in this series, what we're going to do is to explore different ways in which work can hide in a backlog full of stories, starting with the case of the hidden work item type hierarchy. So let's dive in. The way the Agile team narrative is normally told begins with someone like a customer, a PO, or a stakeholder having some idea or need, which is then expressed as one or more user stories, which later the team will deliver in short intervals. Although the recommendation is that user stories have to be independent of each other, so that's the I in the INVEST principle, it is very often the case that they are not. And in this video we will focus on one particular kind of dependency, the connection between stories that is required to answer the question of whether we've completed all the work related to an initial need or a request that originated a particular set of stories. In many cases, that initial set is composed of fairly independent stories that could be delivered in any order or even not at all. Actually, Agile methods rely on a mechanism like this as a way to adjust scope and maximize value. However, there is another case. When a given story is considered too big or too complex, and then it's split in smaller pieces. This situation can happen not only at initial refinement, but often also occurs once a story moves into development and some new discovery is made, and the team decides that it's necessary to defer part of the work for later. What makes this set of stories different is that as long as the parent story is committed, then they are committed as well. They lost their optionality. This distinction, however, is hidden from view when all we have is a backlog of seemingly homogeneous work item types. What's really happening is that we have different work item types that form a hierarchy. Many teams use the concept of epics to deal with this hierarchy, but what we often see is that they don't assign epics any more meaning than being a classification or grouping mechanism to conceptually make sense of a growing backlog of stories, in a sense to know what's related to what. This becomes a problem when the classification scheme that you're using loses its connection with specific commitments that were made in order to satisfy the initial need or request. The most common way this happens is when epics are created based on functional areas of the application, or themes, for example. When later new stories are discovered, they are added to the proper theme, irrespective of whether they are part of the current commitments or simply ideas to be potentially considered or explored later. At the same time, when larger committed stories are further broken down, they are also added to the same list. But since they originated in a committed item, they are probably committed as well. But it's not easy to tell. At the end of all this, epics contain a mix of stories with different degrees of optionality, which makes very difficult to answer the question of how close are we to being done, or even what are we going to do now versus later. The solution to this is to take advantage of hierarchies to model commitments explicitly, and it turns out that a hierarchy of at most 3 levels is sufficient for this, assuming that we agree on assigning specific meaning to each level of the hierarchy. The top level of the hierarchy represents what we call customer recognizable items, and it serves the purpose of representing units of commitment. For an item to be customer recognizable, they need to have meaning for your customers. That is, You should be able to have meaningful conversations with your customers about the significance and value of the item, and more importantly, engage them in discussions about trade-offs. So what's more important than what should come first versus later, etc. They can become units of delivery and units of commitment. So when a customer need is detected or requested, agree to represent it as one or more customer recognizable items. Use these items as the top level of your work item hierarchy and structure all your commitment discussions at this level. Customer recognizable items are often on the bigger side of the spectrum. As a result, they will move more slowly across your workflow, which will make managing flow more difficult. So then you can agree to use the second level of the hierarchies for the purpose of managing flow, decomposing these top level items into more smaller granular pieces. These smaller pieces are often not recognizable to customers, and instead they have a more tactical nature to make work more convenient or manageable from the perspective of the delivery team. You can also use this level to allow for emergent requirements and optionality. So your commitment is to the delivery of the top level item, while the second level is used to show options on how that may be achieved, to capture them as they're discovered, and as a way to defer decisions and adjust scope. Some teams find it useful to further decompose this second level as a way to track all the tasks performed by individuals and to help them manage their own personal workload. When we do that, we are now representing individual low-level tasks. Now, although it's theoretically possible to continue decomposition even further, there isn't really a good reason to go beyond 3 levels. It will just add overhead. Moreover, this level of granularity tends to disappear as the process maturity increases. What we often find is that teams initially find it useful to track tasks, but eventually they grow out of it, so to speak. Also, you can work with your customer to make your top level items smaller and smaller over time, essentially reducing the scope of your commitments and allowing for higher levels of agility. This is also a maturity evolution. So for small enough top level items, the need to perform decomposition may even go away altogether, and the result of that will be the hierarchy collapsing into a simpler model. Finally, it's important to point out that work items could still be grouped according to some other classification criteria if you find it useful. Things like functional area or theme or release, projects, a market segment, etc. But it's important to realize that these containers are there to help us with cognitive load, the cognitive load that results from a large backlog, not to help us manage flow. And managing flow arguably has a much bigger impact in day-to-day decisions. So these containers are usually not represented on the board as tickets that move through a workflow, but more often we see them as horizontal lanes or tags on the constituents tickets. So, to summarize, if you have a backlog consisting of just user stories, take a deeper look at it, looking for the signs of a hidden work item type hierarchy. 2 things to watch for. One is steps in your workflow where work splits, where stories arrive to be split, followed by, second sign, the need for later tracking what goes with what or what's committed with what. So if you conclude that you have a hidden work item type hierarchy, well, you can design it. And as we mentioned in this video, you can start by using different meanings for each level. In particular, use one level for commitments and different level for managing flow. Keep in mind that 2 levels are usually enough, sometimes 3, normally no more than 3. And you may still need to group stories or epics or items in some way to just identify that they're connected in some way, so such as projects or releases or themes. Just keep in mind that those groupings usually don't appear on your board as tickets, but as lanes or tags. And with this, we end another episode of Unhiding. We hope that you found it useful and it left you with curiosity for more. We encourage you to keep in touch with us. You can Contact us at our website at www.squirrelnorth.com, as well as LinkedIn and Twitter. Bye for now.